We are looking at Parshat Noach this week, the story of the flood. And I'm imagining, though again, we're all in different parts of the country, but I suspect we all have our own associations with floods of late. I know that I'm reading this story a little bit differently this year than I did even last year, given the just huge amounts of rain and what definitely felt like flooding, and was flooding in New York and in Massachusetts, where I was for the summer as well. So the story of Noach is, of course, the story of this one individual who is identified by God as being worthy in a world that was unworthy for salvation. And in the opening verses, we're told that the world has, gone to hell. Kol haaretz hamas. That everything is, people are bad. We don't get so much more detail. The commentators surely fill it in. And as a result, God is going to destroy everything, and Noah will be saved upon his ark together with his family and some representative animals as well. And the focus of our time today, again, is going to be the Sfat Emet. So I don't know if everybody was here last week or some of you were, so just a word of introduction is that we're going to be tracking the weekly portions together with a singular Hasidic teacher named the Sfat Emet, or Rabbi Yehuda Leib Alter of Ger, who is a Hasidic Rebbe who lived from 1847 to 1905, who, in my humble opinion, has a really beautiful internal, subjective, personal take on these Torah portions in a way that I hope can help us each hone our practice and our kind of intentions as we move towards the Shabbat of reading it. And so I want to actually begin with a reference to the first founding Hasidic Rebbe, which is the Baal Shem Tov. And on this week's Parsha, regarding the ark, the Baal Shem Tov hones in on a particular word, a particular verse. And Adi, I'll ask you to share it now. This is just the verse, not the Baal Shem Tov, right? So this isn't the first verse of our portion, but it is one of the sort of introductory verses to the actual flood story itself. Vayomer Hashem lenoach bo ata v'chol beitcha el hateva ki otcha ra'iti tzadik lefanai b'dor hazeh. God said to Noah, "Go into the ark with all your household, for you alone have I found righteous before me in this generation." You can take it off for the moment now. Bo el hateva ata v'chol beitcha, you and your household, which seems sort of literal enough, right? His household, his family was invited to join. But the Baal Shem Tov actually sees in this teaching something bigger, something more instructive for all people who seek to stay afloat. And he says that ata v'chol beitcha, you and your whole household, might be thought of as you and all your baggage. Like, bring all your stuff. It all has a place on the ark, right? And you can think of that visually, even just in terms of household goods, and maybe he literally brought his favorite, I don't know, pajamas or something onto the ark. And you could also think about it in terms of the animals. And as my little daughter, who's 3 years old, reminded me this morning, based on what her preschool teachers are teaching her, that the bathrooms were in the downstairs of the ark, she told me. So what Whether or not that's so, who knows? But the idea, right, if you think about it, right, is this ark was not a pretty place per se, right? I don't know what your homes look like, 40 days of quarantine, right? But I can say, I can say that, right, mine was not pristine, home with 3 children making a big mess. So now add in the pets, right? And all the wild animals, or not so wild in this case, but right, all the animals, all of their poop, right? All the stuff, right? It was a container of life and a container of mess too. All the stuff that we humans, as well as and all creatures, like both bring with us and create, was on that ark. And the Baal Shem Tov really uses this as a kind of invitation. Bo el hateva, bo, the word bo, come in, right? Come in, and when you come in with all that you're bringing with you. Nothing is going to stay out. Bracket that most of the earth is destroyed, but whatever, right? Bring all of your stuff with you. And he understands that to mean all of your complexities and all of your doubts. In the words of the Baal Shem Tov, it's machshavot zarot, zar is foreign. All those things that you think don't belong, they do belong here. And if you want to find salvation and you want to find safety, or as we'll see in a moment for the Sfat Emet, if you want to find yourself within this container of ultimately kind of spiritual uplift, you're going to have to take it all with you. So that is the sort of background. That's the background that I want to share with you before looking at what the Sfat Emet does with this. But he himself is in a tradition. He himself has already imbibed this kind of a notion that the teva, the ark, can contain everything. And you can already hear, I hope, that even in the English translation of teva as ark has associations to other kinds of arks that contain other things in our communal lives. That is Torah, right? So there's an understandable bridge made between the teva, the ark on water, and the ark of Torah, both being containers, holders of essentially sort of our possessions and our most valued treasures. Okay, so now we're going to look at that text. And okay, sorry, one word of, I got some feedback from some of you last week, which I so appreciated. And I'm going to continue to just welcome that. And it seemed like my sort of reading the questions in the chat aloud was distracting for some of you. So I'm going to just offer your, there is a space in the chat to post questions that you might have along the way. I'm fairly decent at taking them in, but I'm not going to acknowledge them explicitly until the end. So you should feel free to use the chat, but I'm going to reserve the explicit engagement with it. And I'm going to leave more time for that. Probably we'll have like 20 minutes or maybe even more to have some more back and forth. So all that is just to say that I saw that there was a question in the chat, and I am going to engage it. And I'm going to do so implicitly from here on in. But there is this one question about transgression, and that is precisely the point of the Baal Shem Tov. Machshavot zarot, which is the Hebrew term for foreign thoughts, are precisely transgressive ones, or maybe even transgressive actions. And the Baal Shem Tov was really renowned for really finding a way to welcome those thoughts that might otherwise take us astray. Surely he hopes that we might be able to harness and use the energy of those thoughts in a more positive way. But he was, and I think many Hasidic thinkers in his wake also were very committed to making space for all of the complexity of humanness. Okay, so we're going to turn now back to the Sfat Emet. If we can put that back on the screen, that would be great. Okay, now he starts off with a whole lot of letters, if you could see that in the Hebrew. He does this a lot. These are acronyms, which can really stump a lot of us. But here's one that he uses regularly, and that tells you a little something about his biography. In Hebrew, it's Amar Adoni Zikni Mori V'Rabbi Zichrono Levracha, just a lot of words, which I translated as, it was said by my master, my grandfather, and my teacher of blessed memory, who was Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Alter. So just so you know, this Rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Alter, was Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Leib Alter, excuse me, was orphaned at a young age and was essentially raised by his grandparents. And his grandfather, who was the founder of this dynasty of Hasidism called the Ger dynasty, named after Ger or Gur, a place in Poland, that was who raised him, and he was deeply, deeply, deeply influenced by him, and he references him time and again throughout this work. And as you can see from this introductory, or from all these like kind of honorifics, clearly there's a tremendous amount of love and respect between them. So he says, my grandfather taught me, Higid b'shem harabanim, it was said in the name of lots of rabbis, Ki tevat Noach, that the ark of Noah, hu tevot ve'otiot haTorah. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. So I already introduced the idea of a teva as an ark, but here's another kind of linguistic play that's going on here, and that is that teva itself means letter. It's another meaning of the word teva is letter, or words. Sorry, words or letters? No, words. Excuse me, words. So what the Sfat Emet does is he kind of explodes this notion, takes it out of the literal story of floods, and begins to invite us all to imagine a different kind of, again, kind of spiritual journey, or a different kind of safety net that isn't in the form of a wooden boat, let's say, but actually is in the form of letters. And what could that possibly mean? Ki tevat Noach hu tevot ve'otiot haTorah, the letters and the words of the Torah. He says, Sheyuchal kol adam lachnis atzmo bechol teva mitorah v'tzvila, ve'al yedei zeh yuchal lihinatzel mikol hester. Says every person can lachnis atzmo, can bring themselves into every word and prayer of the Torah, and in this way to save oneself from hiddenness. That's a very oblique statement. So I'm going to step back a little. Okay, so you can take off the text for a moment, and I'll just say the following, right? So we have an ark that saves, the ark keeps one afloat, the ark is letters. How can letters keep a person afloat, and how can letters save a person from hiddenness? There are like a lot of questions that I think might be out here right now. So let me say this. The same Baal Shem Tov who talked about the ark as a place that all can be brought into or onto, also spoke of letters and words, Hebrew specifically for him, Hebrew letters and words that can actually be sort of portals to to spirit. So this was a kind of practice for him. And I'm sure at IJS there are wonderful people who could guide you in that way. I'm not one of them. But the idea of visualizing letters is itself seen as a kind of technique to help one engage with and sort of see the world differently through letters. I'm going to say something just slightly related to that, but isn't directly a kind of meditative practice. I think that the Sfat Emet is sort of using that almost metaphorically as a way of saying that it is upon us, uses the word lachnis, to bring ourselves, to insert ourselves, to assert our place in these words and letters of Torah and prayer, which I think means that we, all of us, are enjoined to actually put ourselves in the story, which could mean put ourselves in the story of the Jewish people, or of humanity even now. Or I think it could mean that when we read the stories of our people, or when we pray the prayers of our people, it is upon us to do the work of locating ourselves within that. And I think that's something that is a challenge. I certainly don't find it simple or easy to do. Maybe it can feel forced. Like, what does it mean to find oneself inside of the story of Noah? But here, in a sense, we see the Sfat Emet trying to do just that in a way, trying to put himself into the story by imagining the nature of his own flood and the nature of his own ark, and what it might mean to locate himself, therefore, in this story. And so I want to sort of suggest for all of us that in a kind of literal way, I do think this is an invitation to redeem, maybe, or personalize or appropriate texts, words, stories, prayers, the language that might itself be either alienating or just foreign. I think here it's an invitation to actually assert one's place in that, which is to say, to locate where your story overlaps with the narratives of the Torah, to name maybe where it doesn't, but to put yourself in anyway. I'm thinking a little bit, sorry, let me just say this differently. This can be seen as in an appropriative kind of way, right? Writing your own prayers, sort of using some of the inherited language that we've had through the ages, but deploying it in ways that feel totally personal and right for you. Or it could mean, right, taking those words as they are, be they words from Torah or words, prayers of other people, and working to find their essentially relevance and meaning for oneself. Because if you recall from last week, right, what constitutes Torah for the Sfat Emet is essentially the divine infinite fabric that we all weave together of our lives. Right? So on the one hand, we have to insert ourselves in it. On the other hand, that insertion doesn't have to be forceful. It has to actually be a kind of soft recognition that we are already there in a way. And he says, and maybe this is kind of the point of that last difficult phrase. There we go. Somebody else just raised it. The meaning of the Torah is no longer hidden. Right. So I'm just going to look at in my version for a moment. The language is ve'al yedei zeh, and through this practice, again, the practice of visualization, perhaps, or the practice of locating oneself in these spaces and places that might otherwise feel foreign and not ours, but doing that kind of a work and welcoming it all, right? Precisely those parts of ourselves or parts of our lives that we otherwise think don't belong in this wider pursuit of Torah or of spirituality, right? He says, "V'al yedei zeh yuchal lihinatzel mikol hester." In this way, we can yuchal lihinatzel. One can be saved from hiddenness. So a word about hester. Hester is like just this incredibly kind of pregnant word. You might be familiar with it from the name, which is my Hebrew name, Esther, right? God says in Deuteronomy, Anochi haster astir panai, I will hide my face from you. The Talmud later kind of puts that inserts it, you might say, right? Because it's anachronistic, but inserts that into Esther's name, right? And asserts that she herself is a character who helps to reveal what's hidden, or maybe carry this legacy of hiddenness as she exists in a world that seems to hide explicit divine intervention, at least. But hastara, hiddenness, is a kind of deep part of Hasidic spirituality. I want to say a word about that. I think I'll say it by way of a different Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, only because this has become musically played and popular, at least in Israel. Rabbi Nachman, who is the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, said that even in the hiddenness behind hiddenness, afilu behastara shebetoch hastara, gam sham nimtza Hashem yitbarach. Even there, God is to be found. Even in the hiddenness within the hiddenness. So what is meant by that? And why is hiddenness or divine concealment so interesting to the Hasidic personality? I think because there's a kind of attention to numbness or lack of spirituality, or ways in which one does not see all that is divine. There's attention, there's value, one might even say, in that from this Hasidic perspective. The Baal Shem Tov identified God as, not only the Baal Shem Tov, I mean, the Tanakh itself talks about El Mistater. God is a hiding God. Among the different attributes, God might be all kinds of things, according, in the Torah's imagination. But one of the things that God is also hiding. And part of what it means to engage in a spiritual life that notices hastara, that pays attention to where one does not easily find God. I kind of lost myself in that sentence. Let me say it differently. Part of the spiritual life is about paying attention both to where we do find God and also to where we don't. And for many of the Hasidic masters, our job is then to kind of overcome that, but we don't overcome it without noticing it, without actually really giving space. And so for the Baal Shem Tov, and later for Rabbi Nachman as well, and I would say for the Sfat Emet, who's much later than that, right? Hastara is a condition that is both an opportunity, right, as well as an obstruction, right? It appears as an obstruction, right? The world can appear godless, spiritless, whatever translations you like to use. Right? It can appear that way, but afilu b'hastara shebetocha hastara. But even in those places where the hiddenness itself is hidden, which is a doubling of language, which, by the way, is also kind of to be located in that initial phrase from Deuteronomy, Anoche haster astir, right? So commentators look at that and say, what does it mean that God, why does God say it twice? Hastir astir. I will hide my hiddenness. What could that mean? Right. And so an interpretation of that is that sort of the deepest depths of let's say of distance or from God, let's say, is when the gap itself is unrecognizable, or when the concealment itself is unrecognizable, meaning one is so numb to the possibility of divinity, mystery in the world, that one doesn't even experience divine absence as absence, but just as non-existence. I think I just got a little bit abstract. So I'm going to say that one more time, and then I'm going to come back to the text because I think I'm getting a little bit afield. For Rabbi Nachman, let's say, there's a condition that is kind of the opposite of the joy itself is related to God awareness, and its opposite is atzvut, which isn't so much sadness as it is numbness, not feeling anything. Sadness is a feeling and is a welcome one, at least in his system, but being numb, that is where it's really hard to move out of. That's a kind of depression, really. And that is what is feared. So hastara, though, hastara is not numbness. Hastara, or encountering hastara, right, is actually recognizing concealment. And that itself is a kind of revelation. I don't miss someone unless I know that they are or ought to be in my life. That itself, right, the missing attests to the relationship itself. If I don't miss someone who's not here, that implies that I have no relationship. I don't have to be pining all the time per se, but if I don't even notice that somebody is absent, right, there is something about that relationship that has been cut off. But the moment that I recognize who's missing, right, that moment I, in a certain way, affirm the relationship itself, even in its absence. And so hastara is the recognition of absence, is the recognition that God ought to be here, but isn't. And the suggestion, right, when we introject ourselves into texts and words and lives, right, of our collective, the claim is that we can actually rid ourselves of, let's say, some of the experience of relationship breakdown. If I'm not interested in being in the prayers or being in the stories, if I have absolutely no interest, it's hard to imagine that relationship getting going, though I know that a lot of people are out there trying to do it, but it's very hard. Better that you should feel alienated. Better that you should, right, say, I'm not really sure how I fit into this story of Noah or this story of Abraham or Sarah or whatever, right? The very act of trying to locate oneself in the story is itself a claim of ownership over the story, is itself a claim of relationship with these words, with these characters, with this story and these people. So I think that this is, again, a kind of invitation into affirmatively seeking out all of our places with all of our complexities inside this arc of the Jewish people. And he goes on to say, and you don't have to put the words back up, I'm just going to read, V'ita kol sheheteva kolatito, ki pevadai tzarich adam liot ra'ui lichnos toch divrei Torah. He says it should be the case that only those who are worthy can enter into this teva, can enter into this grand arc and this grand story, and only, fill in the blanks there, whoever you think is worthy should be able, right, to load this. Maybe we'll just say because the question was asked before, like the sinner shouldn't be able to find themselves inside of the story. The sinner should be somehow outside of the ark. But he says to the contrary, kol shateva kolatato, liklot in Hebrew is to absorb. The teva, the ark, can hold you. The ark can absorb you. The ark, the collective, has the power that individuals don't necessarily have on their own to, again, help one find refuge, I suppose. And he says, Sarich Adam excuse me, Aval al yedei habitul beklal Yisrael yuchal kol Adam lehit dabek b'divrei Torah. He uses the language of Klal Yisrael here to the degree that one puts one's stake with the collective, aligns oneself with the collective, right? To the extent that one does that, one will find essentially refuge in the collective. And I want to just say one, I think maybe minor textual point, but I think is still kind of interesting. Adi, could you just post the link again to the text, please? Because it looks like there's a desire for that. Thank you so much. So the one of the interesting things about this commentary and others is the way in which it's very subtly interweaves lots of references to other texts. And sometimes those are mystical texts, and sometimes they're rabbinic texts and just biblical texts. In this case, you wouldn't know it because there are no like quotation marks, at least in the original. I think I put some in the English translation, which was my own, and I take responsibility for any flaws there. But in the original, there are no quotation marks. So it sounds like it's just him speaking, but actually when he refers to this ark, he says, Kol shateva kol latato, that the ark, the teva, the word, you can think of it almost as a capital W, the word, or in this case, maybe, or the collective story, the collective community, right? It can actually absorb anyone essentially who wants to be a part. What's interesting to note there is that he is actually quoting a small snippet of a different piece of Talmud, which is itself pretty weird, which is why I thought, let's not get into this too much. But here's a weird factoid of the day, or not factoid, but weird rabbinic saying of the day. So it says in this week's Parsha that when Noah was to welcome the animals aboard, he was supposed to welcome them ish v'ishto, which you could translate as male and female or husband and wife, actually. And the Talmud asks, like, what's up with animal marriage? Like, since when do the animals marry? What does it mean for there to be husbands and wives among the animals? And there's actually this very strange, I think, idea that what the Torah means is that animals that, I'll say it this way, animals that were sort of pure enough that they only reproduce within their own species were allowed on the boat, and those that had like intra-species relations were not. We're going to, as I said, I promise you this will be weird, and it is. We're going to sort of bracket this investigation into animal sexuality and just say that the claim of the Gemara or the Talmud, right, is that the way that Noah knew which animals were allowed on the boat and which ones weren't was that they kind of all passed by, and the ark acted as had a gateway of some kind, it was a gatekeeper of sorts. And some animals could come in and some animals couldn't. Some were kept out. And those that came in were the pure ones, and those that were kept out were the impure ones. And I think what's really interesting, and I think deliberate on the part of the Sfat Emet here, is that he chooses this phrase about the ark absorbing kol shatzeva kol latito in the most, he uses it in the most inclusive way possible. I'm going to say that again, right? The Talmud uses it as an exclusive term, that the ark absorbed only that which it was supposed to absorb, i.e., those who were quote unquote impure or unworthy were left out. But the Sfat Emet instead uses it in the opposite way to say that the ark can absorb all, much in the way that the Baal Shem Tov also said, right, that the ark absorbs all. It can take anything and anyone, and right, sinners, saints, machshavot, zarot, strange things and things that one might otherwise think would be alien to the ship, right? It is all welcome aboard when we try to stay afloat. And so here we have this other example of the Sfat Emet using a similar inclusive philosophy to identify the ark / Torah / word as a place or a space or a story that in its essence is an inclusive one. Now, the onus is upon each and every one of us, he says, lachnis et atzmo, right? A person themselves has to take it upon themselves to assert their place in that ark. So it's kind of, there's an interesting, I don't know, but fruitful tension that is named here between the klal, the collective Israel, somehow itself being a source of absorption, and at the same time, the responsibility laying on the individual to kind of knock on the door, let's say. Right, so the community needs to be inclusive, but the individual needs to lay claim to community or to Torah. I'm using them interchangeably. I recognize there's kind of slippage there. But I do think that he is kind of playing around with this teva idea, as teva as Torah, teva as community, teva as letters and words, right? These are all different, access points into a kind of practice that does rest on others, other people, and other stories and other words. But that also is demanding of us, yes, to kind of elect to be part of that story. And when we do, there are no bounds, it sounds like. But we do need to choose to come aboard. So just to kind of come back to the, flood imagery, I think that there's, in this it's a short teaching, but it's a dense teaching, I think, right? I do think that there's a kind of wisdom being offered about how one might respond to flooding emotionally, right? Flooding literally, but flooding when we feel overtaken or unanchored, or right, choose your metaphor there. How might we restabilize or find shelter? How might we do that, right? And so he offers here, I think, a couple of ways to find solid ground. Most importantly, right, to bring all of what's going on and all of oneself in, and not to think that we have to cut off parts of ourselves in order to be quote unquote saved. To do so in a way that consciously and assertively puts ourselves back into the stories and the prayers and the hopes of our larger community. And then very much related to that, of course, is to is to put our stake precisely back into Klal Yisrael, into the collective, because that collective can help us as individuals carry things that we might not otherwise be able to do on our own. So whether that means leaning on friends, whether it means finding solace in words and poetry and prayers, whether it means actually gathering, right? It's an invitation to collectivity, both a collectivity of consciousness and also a collectivity in terms of relationships, both of those as being ways to help us find stability when everything feels like it is coming undone. So now I'm going to stop there, and I'd love to take questions or comments. So let's do the hand raising thing. If you can do that with your little reaction button on the bottom of your screen. I think that would be useful. And if you can't find it, then just, I don't know if you can unmute yourselves. If you can, please do. And if not, I'm going to, let's see. Janet Derrick.
There. Okay, so my question is, and someone right above me sort of had the same thing in the chat. So if the purpose of being on the ark was to wash away all the sinners or the impure animals, but according to some, it was an inclusive opportunity, and if you wanted to come, you got to come. So can you talk to that discrepancy?
Yeah.
Unless it's the idea that, well, if you decide you really want to be afloat, then somehow that lessens your negative qualities, and you get a chance for, I don't know.
So I think what I hear you saying is the gap between the kind of the text itself and the interpretation of the text is pretty vast here. Not only wide, but like really quite contradictory, in fact, right? That you have a situation in the Parsha is a story of like of total exclusivity, right? Only one special family gets saved, and like everyone else dies. I mean, this is a dramatic like extermination. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible story. And so you're absolutely right that the Sfadamet is being creative. It's just a light way of saying it, right? He is taking great liberties in doing this. And frankly, I think that it's a corrective. I do. I think that that's why I said before, this is an example, right? As he's talking about inserting yourself in the story, he's performing it too, right? How do you insert yourself in the story? Do you just say, oh, I am Noah? No. I mean, somebody might, that's great, but right. Or I'm a giraffe. No, you actually try to enter into these stories in a way that can feel real and alive for you. It doesn't mean, it's interesting. He does use the word bitul, which is a kind of submission, but he doesn't use it for words. We can talk about this too, but he talks about it relative to community or to Klal Yisrael, that one has to, in a certain way, submit to that collective. But you don't have to submit to words to find yourselves into it. In fact, I think that the word, but that the language that he uses of lehachnis is, this could just be my own ear. There's a kind of aggression to it, actually. It isn't a soft, like, make the words meaningful, but like insert yourself, do something to make the words like work for you, essentially. And so he does that when he retells this story as a story of inclusion. So I really I thank you for raising that. And I want to just say 100%, you're absolutely right, that if you're looking for like proof text in the text of the Torah, you're not going to find it. But it's one of the great glories of this rabbi, but I think of our tradition, is the chutzpah to really enlarge the stories and appropriate them for our purposes. And here we see him doing just that. I hope that addressed the question somehow. Okay, there are other people whose hands are raised. Adi, can you help me here?
Yes, we have Cantor Hasha Perman.
Great.
Hi, I'm loving this a lot. Thank you. So one thing that happens for me is when I listen to this, I think of the most inclusive, welcoming story, which is Pesach and the Seder.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the language of inclusivity it's almost like a remedy to this sense of the destruction and of saying who's going to be chosen,
Mm-hmm.
who's going to enter in, and the implied welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And the text of the Haggadah really feels like the complement
That's so interesting.
the welcome of that all who are hungry.
Yeah, beautiful.
I think also that this text is about the hunger,
Yeah,
and the welcome that the Sfat Emet offers us.
yeah. If I might, I just want to kind of connect that to the comment from before. I think that's really beautiful, and I think that you're absolutely right that this too is a kind of corrective, and it's a corrective for, or complement you said, but also corrective. I'm going to say, because Noach in the story is identified as an ish tzaddik. Ish tzaddik tamim haya b'dorata, right? He's a great and righteous person. In contrast, by the way, to like next week for Lech Lecha, Avraham, we're not told that he's worthy. He's just chosen. And like, we've got thousands of years of commentary of people trying to figure out why he was chosen. But for Noah, we are actually told that he is a chosen one for a reason. He is righteous. And I love what you're saying about like all who want to come and eat in the Seder, right? It does seem like the Sfat Emet here is kind of is pulling that move for the Teva, for the ark, right? All who want in, you can come in, right? The Noach story is this exclusive story, but the story that we're going to tell about the Noach story, or the story we're going to tell about Egypt, right, is a story that invites in as opposed to pushes out, right? That makes the Teva an absorber and not a pusher outer, for lack of better terms. Sorry. But yeah, thank you so much for that. Others? There's another hand. I'm going to find you. Lisa Goldstein. Hi.
Hi, thank you. Rabbi, sometimes since my starting of studying Torah, which is fairly new, the pandemic brought me some time in my life to be able to do this, which I really enjoy. But I have found the differences in, viewpoints or ways that we come to the table with these stories in this study, and now with this Sfat Emet, which I'm really enjoying. But then when there's, what confuses me or what I become curious about is when there are these different viewpoints of the stories, what then are we teaching the youngest of us? What then are we coming to the children with in relaying these stories? I like this viewpoint about, the inclusivity, but you can read it in a different way, being, excluding those. And so what then are we portraying to our children?
Hard question. I know what my kids are learning. But I hope that, in time, we can add complicated layers. This might be, I don't know how helpful this is, but there's a way of studying Torah that works. And I think some of you through IJS have made use of this, of Pshat, the Pardes model of Pshat, Remez, Drash, Sod, or there are different ways of interpreting that, but simple meaning, and then deeper meaning, and then the hidden meaning, and then the secret meaning, which is essentially different layers of the same text. And as we find, like that Sod, that fourth layer, can actually contradict the very first. And so I think that, your question's a great one, but it's a question of pedagogy. And so how ought our kids learn? I'm really trying to figure that one out myself, but I do think that learning the pshat, the plain meaning of the text, learning just the story, and in this case, the exclusive story, Well, there's value there, because how are you going to find your way into the stories if you don't speak the stories, if you don't know the stories? And then we've got, hopefully, time, whether that's, I don't know whether we have to think about it as children versus adults, or early entrance into texts and later entrance into text. Like all things, right? We grow more interesting as we get more interested, and things get more complex and sophisticated. And we're all children, and we can all learn the pshat, and we can all hopefully also go a little deeper, and lachnis et atzmeinu, enter ourselves into these texts to make them our own. So yeah, thank you, and I'm so happy you're here. I'm just looking at the chat. I'm sure I've missed many things, so I apologize, but I just see that Anne Rickover says, my 7-year-old grandson said that the rainbow of the story means that God learned his lesson and wouldn't be bad again. That there's a way in which that's in the story. God won't be bad again, because God promises that God won't bring another flood. But well, I don't know. There's a lot to say there too, but it is beautiful and rich to see how these stories that are children's stories on the face also come to mean a whole lot more. What level is the Sfat Emet writing on? There's a question here from Rabbi Rebecca Reese. I'm sorry if I don't know how to pronounce your name. I think he is, well, it's an argument about whether he's writing on the Sod. He's definitely somewhere in the Drash Sod arena. I say questionable because some people see the Sod as like specifically referring to kind of the mystical, and he does veer there sometimes, but I wouldn't say that he's there all the time. But I guess I just do want to say that I hope that, or I'd like to suggest that Remez and Sod need not be seen only through the lens of kind of what's most abstruse or arcane, but actually like the most playful and creative. And I really think that the Sfat Emet offers us something that's also really playful and creative, and really gets permission to do that, right? To see the Teva in these weird ways, to imagine it in this really inclusive way when the text seems to suggest otherwise, and to find all kinds of proof texts, or let's say, intertexts that actually work against themselves in the case of that Talmudic statement about the nature of the ark as being, right, a gatekeeper or not. So I hope that what we can see here is an invitation to play too. Okay, so any other questions or comments? Even if you put them in the chat and I didn't address it, feel free to speak them. I'd love to hear your words. Anyone else? I'm not seeing hands, so if you want to speak, just speak. Or just a comment is welcome too. It doesn't have to be a question. No? Okay. I am looking quickly to see if there's anything else.
I have a question, because I was talking earlier with my Shavruta about the ark, the boat, and the ark that the tablets are in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
First off, is it the same Hebrew word? Is the English word the same? Are they spelled the same? What is the connection?
Okay, so that's what you're great to point that out, right? The Hebrew for ark, as in the ark for the tablets or the Torah, is Aron, and here we have Teva. But I do still think it is a reasonable association, even in the Hebrew, to think of the Teva. I'm just trying to think if anybody else, you can say it or put it in the chat, if anybody in their own like communities refers to the ark in that way, you should say so. But in any case, so the association between ark and ark, that is in English, but he explicitly makes that connection by talking about the teva as divrei Torah, right? The teva of the ark as Torah. So he makes that connection, even if it's not as linguistically solid in the Hebrew as it is in the English. Who knows? Maybe that's how we got to it in English. I don't know.
And of course, it's interesting, ARK from English, ARK, ark, and the arc of a rainbow,
Ooh,
ARC.
nice.
So just from the wording, just from the linguistics, I was
Great.
thinking about the connection between those three
That's beautiful.
words. And especially if you're not seeing them, you're just hearing them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. See, you're finding yourself in the words. I love it. You get a check from the spot Okay, my friends, we will stop here. Thank you all so much. Come back for Lech Lecha next week. Oh, and like last week, I'm going to just put my email address here, and you are all welcome to be in touch if there's any questions you have or feedback or comments or things you'd like to see. I am very, very available for that. Thank you so much. Take good care and stay healthy. I wish you all